The text arrived while I was helping customers at my boutique. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I've already emptied our joint account. Ha ha ha. My hands didn't shake as I read it. My voice didn't waver as I helped Mrs. Peterson pick out a scarf. The only sign that my husband of 12 years had just detonated our marriage via text was a slight tightening around my eyes. I waited until Mrs. Peterson left, her purchase wrapped in our signature silver paper, before typing my response. Good luck. My name is Emily, and at 38, I just received the most callous goodbye in history. But while Jake was probably gloating over his grand exit, imagining me in tears over his betrayal, I was calmly locking up my boutique for the day. The signs had been there for months. The late nights at work that never matched his pay stubs, the sudden password changes on his phone, the way he'd started going to the gym religiously, buying new clothes, trying to recapture his youth. 3 months ago, I found a receipt for dinner for two at an expensive restaurant, on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That same evening, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he suggested combining our finances to simplify things, I had smiled, agreed, and then quietly transferred my personal savings into my new account, the joint account he just emptied. It contained just enough to keep him from getting suspicious, about 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safely tucked away, along with detailed records of every suspicious transaction he'd made over the past year. My phone buzzed again. Don't bother begging. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the new receptionist at his office. I had met her at the company Christmas party, watched her laugh too loudly at Jake's jokes, noticed how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. She was young enough to be his daughter, naive enough to think she was special. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called my lawyer, the one I had consulted 2 months ago when I found hotel charges on our credit card statement. It's time, I said simply. He just made his move. The papers are ready, she replied. I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in Miami? No rush. Let him think he's won first. Another text from Jake. I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy. My little shop, the successful boutique I had built from scratch, the one that generated more income than his middle management position, the one whose profits I had carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in Miami. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. That evening, I spent my time in our house. My house, actually, since I had inherited it from my grandmother and kept it in my name despite Jake's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. A lucky instinct that had paid off. While organizing the paperwork my lawyer would need, I found our wedding album. Jake looked so different back then, before his midlife crisis turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days, he wore shirts too tight for his softening middle, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, and used slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a 45-year-old man. My phone kept buzzing with texts from him, each one more condescending than the last. I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age. I already told my family. They agree. We grew apart. It's nobody's fault, really. I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Let him dig his own grave. My lawyer would love his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. Then the last text caught my attention. BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift. LOL. Perfect. I called the credit card company. Mrs. Carter speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately. Of course, ma'am. Can you identify the charges? 2 first-class tickets to Miami, booked today, hotel charges at the Royal Palm, and I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user. Do you have documentation of the fraud? Yes. Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them. The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Jake and Melissa would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated. Their hotel reservation? Canceled. My phone buzzed again. Don't worry about the house. I'll let you stay there until you find something smaller. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Did he really think he had any claim to my grandmother's house? Had his ego grown so large that he'd forgotten whose name was on the deed? Another buzz. And I know the shop means a lot to you. We can work out a fair payment for your half. My half of my business? The one I had built myself, funded myself, grew myself while he complained about my long hours and called it my hobby. I poured a glass of wine. The good stuff. The one I had been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Tomorrow, Jake would learn some hard truths about property law and separate assets. But tonight, I would enjoy the quiet and plan my next chapter. The morning brought a flurry of increasingly angry texts from Jake. What the hell did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me! I silenced my phone and headed to my boutique. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of designer handbags to unpack. Life goes on, even when your husband runs off with a receptionist young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, his mother called. Emily, dear, Jake told us everything. About how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans. I put her on speaker while I arranged a window display. Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card? Silence. Then, well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant. Barbara, I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money, or maybe the one where he mocked my age. Another pause. He did seem a bit cruel. I told him that message was inappropriate. I appreciate the call, Barbara. I've always liked you, but I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Jake and his family during the proceedings. Proceedings? Already in motion. Goodbye, Barbara. By late afternoon, Jake's sister, Amanda, was spreading gossip through mutual friends. Apparently, Jake and Melissa were stuck at a budget motel near the airport. Their Miami dreams temporarily derailed. He had tried using his personal credit cards, but those had been maxed out for months. Another red flag I had noticed. My lawyer called with an update. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission of emptying the joint account and the documented credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze all remaining assets. Has he been served yet? Not yet, but he'll get the papers at his new motel address. Speaking of which, his girlfriend's social media is providing excellent evidence. She's been posting about their adventure all day, including some choice comments about you. I smiled, thinking of my own documentation. A year's worth of suspicious charges, hotel receipts, text messages proving premeditation. Jake had been so focused on his grand escape that he'd never considered I might be watching, waiting, preparing. My phone buzzed again. You think you're so smart, but I made copies of all the boutique's financial records. Half that business is mine. I forwarded the text to my lawyer, adding it to the growing file of Jake's mistakes. Let him learn the hard way about separate assets and business ownership. Sometimes, The best revenge is simply being prepared. Monday's emergency hearing was everything I could have hoped for. Jake arrived in his new young wardrobe, designer jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Melissa waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. My lawyer presented our evidence methodically. Jake's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses. Each piece carefully collected over months of quiet observation. Your Honor, Jake's hastily hired lawyer attempted. My client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Carter's actions have been vindictive and calculating. Calculating? My lawyer countered. You mean prudent? My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business. The judge reviewed my documentation, the separate property deed to the house, the boutique's incorporation papers in my name only, the careful separation of business and personal finances that Jake had always mocked as obsessive. Mr. Carter, the judge addressed him directly. You admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this? Jake shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to make a clean break by committing financial fraud. The judge raised an eyebrow. And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets. His lawyer made a last-ditch effort. The business grew during the marriage, Your Honor. My client is entitled to— The business was established before the marriage, my lawyer interrupted, and Mrs. Carter maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned. I watched as reality sank into Jake's face. He had thought this would be easy. Empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He had never understood why I insisted on keeping things separate. Had mocked my careful bookkeeping. The judge's ruling was swift. The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, he announced. All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Carter is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Jake paled. But that money's gone, he protested. We spent it on— Then I suggest you find a way to replace it. The judge cut him off. And Mr. Carter, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with a paramour. Outside the courthouse, I heard Melissa's sharp voice. So what about Miami? Where are we supposed to go now? His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor, heading back to the business he had never understood or respected. Part 6. The fallout. Over the next few weeks, Jake's situation became more and more desperate. He tried claiming the boutique had been his idea, that he had invested money in its early days, that he had been my business partner all along, claims that were quickly disproven by my meticulous records. He's scrambling, my lawyer observed. Melissa's social media shows they're staying in her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't the glamorous escape he imagined. His family started reaching out, their tone markedly different from before. We had no idea, his sister Amanda admitted when she stopped by my boutique one day. He told us you were cold, controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew. His mother called again, her voice weary. The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that. I thought I did anyway. I let the calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago. Now, It felt like rats deserting a sinking ship. Ironically, my boutique thrived, boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women started coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they planned to buy. My ex tried something similar. One customer confided, while purchasing a designer handbag, thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. Meanwhile, my phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Jake. His tone swung wildly between anger and desperation. "You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. Can't we work something out? That business would be nothing without my support." I forwarded each message to my lawyer without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard Melissa was having second thoughts. Apparently, sharing her studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. The age gap that had once seemed exciting during secret hotel meetings felt different in the harsh light of reality. She posted about toxic relationships yesterday, my lawyer mentioned during an update call, and she removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt sorry for Jake. Almost. But then, I remembered his haha after telling me he'd emptied our account. The casual cruelty of his comments about my age. The way he had assumed I would be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else. Pride. Pride in my foresight. Pride in my quiet strength. Pride in the fact that while he had underestimated me, I had never underestimated myself. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Jake's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Melissa was noticeably absent. She had moved on to a coworker her own age, according to office gossip. Jake had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account he had emptied. His lawyer looked tired, probably from trying to find loopholes in my airtight documentation. "Your Honor," his lawyer tried one last time. Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support and— "Moral support," my lawyer interrupted. She pulled up screenshots of Jake's old texts, like these messages where he belittled Mrs. Carter's business as her little shop, or these social media posts where he called it her hobby. The judge had clearly seen enough. The final settlement reflected my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Jake got his personal possessions and his car, which was worth less than he owed on it. Outside the courthouse, he hissed at me through clenched teeth. "You've destroyed me. I have to move back in with my parents." I tilted my head and gave him a slow smile. "No, Jake. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me, too." His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house. His new home, at 45 years old. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone. The man who had mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running my successful business. As his mother led him away, I heard her start in on him. "Honestly, Jake, what were you thinking? A 20-year-old? Emptying bank accounts? Sending those horrible texts?" I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Jake had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he had merely set my carefully laid plans into motion. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my boutique had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jake struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he dismissed was thriving. I had hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining national traction. News of Jake's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He had tried dating apps, but women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women avoided him after hearing about his history through office gossip. Melissa had warned her friends about him, even sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back. His career suffered too. The company's HR department launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he had expected, it went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate workplace relationships. He actually tried claiming age discrimination, Amanda told me when she stopped by my boutique again. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. HR just added that complaint to his file? She nodded. Exactly. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Jake had alienated his own family. I know we didn't support you at first, she admitted, running her fingers over a silk scarf. He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him. Meanwhile, my lawyer kept me updated on Jake's repeated attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied. His claim of unfair distribution? Dismissed, thanks to his own text messages. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, my lawyer told me, laughing. And what did the judge say? He asked if Haha made theft less illegal. The boutique's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines featured my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy entrepreneur. Young women started seeking my advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. The best protection is preparation, I told one of them, and always trust your instincts. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted the grand opening of my third boutique location. The event attracted local media, and the story they wanted to tell wasn't about my failed marriage. It was about a successful businesswoman expanding her brand. Jake's betrayal had become a mere footnote in my success story. During the event, Melissa unexpectedly walked in. She looked younger than ever. Or maybe I just felt that much stronger. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse like a shield. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I believed everything he told me about how you were cold, controlling, how you didn't support his dreams. Then I watched him try the same manipulation tactics on me when things got tough. I continued arranging a display of designer sunglasses. Those weren't his dreams, Melissa. They were escapes. There's a difference, she nodded. I know that now. Then after a pause, he tried to move in when you froze the accounts. Thought my studio apartment would be temporary. After 2 weeks of him complaining about the size of my closet and suggesting I take out a loan for a bigger place, I understood what you meant about the difference between dreams and escapes. I actually laughed at that. Let me guess. He had big plans, but no way to fund them. Exactly, she said. Everything was going to work out once his investments paid off, once he got that promotion, once his cryptocurrency definitely increased in value. She shook her head. I'm dating someone my own age now. We have student loans and a small apartment. But at least we're building something real. After she left, my assistant manager whispered, Was that the girlfriend? I smirked. No, that was just another woman who learned the same lesson I did. I gestured to a young couple examining our designer handbags. Speaking of lessons, let's talk about your idea for expanding our accessories line. 2 years after Jake's cruel text, I received an invitation to speak at a women's business conference. The topic wasn't divorce or betrayal. It was about building and protecting a successful business. During the Q&A, a woman asked, My husband says I'm being paranoid about keeping business and personal finances separate. He says marriage means sharing everything. I smiled. My ex-husband said the same thing, right up until he tried to claim half my business in our divorce. Trust your instincts. Protection isn't paranoia. The boutique chain had grown to 5 locations. The little shop Jake had mocked. It now employed over 30 people and had been featured in national magazines. Meanwhile, Jake had finally moved out of his parents' house into a small apartment above a garage. The best revenge was never about getting even. It was about getting better.